I didn't think I'd ever go to war over grass, but the first time I saw tire tracks cutting clean across my lawn, I knew this wasn't going to be a one-time thing, and by the third time it happened, I stopped fixing the damage and started keeping records. My name's Daniel Reeves. I live on the corner of Maple and 3rd Out in a quiet suburb just outside Columbus, the kind of neighborhood where people wave but don't really know each other, where everything looks peaceful until it isn't. When I bought the house 3 years ago, the corner lot was actually the reason I chose it. More space, more light, more room to build something that felt like mine, and I put a lot into that yard, more than most people probably would. Not just money but time, patience, routine. The grass was Bermuda, thick and stubborn, the kind that looks soft but takes real effort to maintain, and I got into a rhythm with it, spring fertilizing, edging every couple weeks, mowing in straight lines like I was painting something, not just cutting it down. I installed the sprinkler system myself over 3 long weekends, digging trenches by hand, laying down PVC pipe, connecting everything to a timer box I mounted near the garage. It wasn't perfect, but it worked, and every time those sprinklers kicked on at sunrise, there was something satisfying about knowing I built that. Now, because it's a corner lot, there's this stretch of lawn that runs along the side yard, right up to the street. No fence, just open space, but clearly within my property line. I had the survey done when I moved in, markers set in the ground, everything documented. That detail matters more than I realized at the time. About 6 months after I moved in, a guy named Travis Nolan bought the house next door. Mid-40s, construction type, drove a lifted black pickup with tires that looked like they belonged on a monster truck. Loud engine, louder personality. At first, we did the neighbor thing, quick introductions, nods when we passed each other, nothing deep. He seemed all right, maybe a little rough around the edges, but nothing that raised alarms. The first time it happened was on a Friday evening. I remember because I had just finished mowing the lawn, lines still crisp, the ground a little soft from watering earlier that day. I was inside making dinner when I heard that low rumble outside, the kind that vibrates through your windows before you even realize what it is. I glanced out and caught just the tail end of it, his truck cutting across the corner of my yard, tires pressing into the grass, then swinging into his driveway like it was nothing. I stood there for a second, spatula in hand, trying to process what I just saw. Maybe he misjudged the turn, maybe it was a one-off thing. People make mistakes. I let it go. The next morning, I walked outside with my coffee, and there they were, 2 deep ruts carved into the grass, running right near one of my survey stakes. Not just surface marks, actual damage. The soil had been pushed down, roots exposed in places, lines that didn't belong there. I crouched down, ran my hand along one of the tracks, and I could already tell it wasn't going to bounce back on its own. I fixed it that day, filled the ruts, leveled the soil, reseeded the patches. Took me a couple hours, but I didn't make a big deal out of it. Stuff happens. Then it happened again the next Friday. Same sound, same path, same casual disregard, like my yard was just an extension of the street. This time I caught it clearly through the front window. Travis didn't even slow down, just cut the corner like he'd done it 100 times, like it belonged to him. I remember feeling that shift in my chest, that quiet irritation turning into something sharper. Not anger yet, just awareness. Saturday morning, same damage. Fresh ruts, slightly deeper this time. I fixed it again, but now I was paying attention. By the 3rd weekend, I was already expecting it, which is a strange feeling, waiting for someone to disrespect something you care about. And sure enough, Friday evening rolled around, and right on cue, there it was, the growl of that engine, the crunch of tires over soil. I didn't even go outside right away. I just stood there, listening, letting it happen. That was the moment something changed for me. Because it wasn't an accident anymore. It wasn't careless driving. It was a habit, a choice. And that's when I decided. I wasn't going to fix the grass this time. I was going to start documenting it. I already had 2 weatherproof cameras mounted under the eaves of my house, angled toward the driveway and part of the street. Mostly for security, nothing fancy, but good enough to capture movement, timestamps, license plates if the lighting was right. That night, I pulled up the footage, and there it was, clear as day. His truck entering frame, cutting across my lawn, tires compressing the grass, then exiting into his driveway. Timestamp in the corner, date, everything. I watched it twice, then a 3rd time, not because I needed to, but because something about seeing it recorded made it real in a different way. The next morning, instead of grabbing tools, I grabbed my phone. Took photos of the damage from multiple angles, crouched down to get close-ups, then went into the garage and came back with a steel ruler, measured the depth of the ruts, noted it in a small notebook I found in a drawer. It felt methodical, almost detached. Later that day, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and started looking into property damage laws in Ohio. Nothing extreme, just basic civil stuff, thresholds for claims, documentation requirements. And what I found surprised me. The bar for filing a claim wasn't high. Not at all. Which meant this wasn't just annoying, it was actionable. I remember leaning back in my chair, staring at the screen for a while, thinking about whether I was really going to go down this road. Because once you do, there's no pretending it's just a misunderstanding anymore. But then I looked out the window at those tire marks, still fresh, still cutting through something I worked on every week, and the decision kind of made itself. That Tuesday, I drafted the first notice. Nothing aggressive, nothing emotional, just facts. Date, time, description of the incident, attached photos, estimated cost to repair the damaged turf based on local sod prices. $48. That's what I calculated for the first incident. I printed everything out, organized it into a clean packet, and sent it via certified mail with return receipt, official enough to be taken seriously, but still giving him a chance to handle it quietly. When I dropped that envelope into the slot at the post office, I felt something settle in my chest. Not relief, not satisfaction, more like the calm before something starts to unfold. And I had a feeling this wasn't going to end with just one letter. The first letter didn't change anything. Not the behavior, not the routine, not even the way he looked at me when we happened to cross paths out front a couple days later. If anything, Travis seemed even more relaxed, like the whole thing either hadn't reached him yet, or he'd already decided it didn't matter. And that uncertainty, that quiet space where you're not sure if someone is ignoring you or just hasn't noticed, that's where things start to stretch. Friday came around again, and I'll be honest, I was waiting for it this time. Not in a dramatic way, just aware, like you get when you know exactly how something is going to play out. Around 6:20 p.m., right on schedule, I heard the engine, that same low rumble rolling down Maple. I didn't even move toward the window right away. I just let the sound fill the room for a second, and then, sure enough, the soft crunch outside, barely audible but unmistakable if you knew what to listen for. I walked over, glanced out, and there it was again. Same path, same angle, same casual swing into his driveway like he wasn't crossing into someone else's property. No hesitation, no glance toward my house, just routine. That night, I pulled the footage, same as before, labeled it, saved it, backed it up. The next morning, I went out with my phone, took photos, measured the depth, a little deeper this time, about 1.5 inches in the worst spot. Wrote everything down. Monday morning, I sent the second notice. Same format, same tone, just updated details, another $48 added to the total. Still nothing. No knock on the door, no text, no note, not even a passive-aggressive comment over the fence. Just silence. And then, the next Friday, it happened again. By the fourth incident, something interesting started to happen, not with him, but with me. The frustration I expected to feel, it didn't really show up the way I thought it would. Instead, everything started to feel structured, predictable, like I wasn't reacting anymore. I was running a process. Friday, he drives over the lawn. Saturday, I document the damage. Monday, I send a notice. Rinse, repeat. I even started setting reminders on my phone, not because I'd forget, but because it made the whole thing feel official, I guess. Controlled. By week 5, I had a small stack of printed notices sitting neatly on my desk, each one clipped together with photos, measurements, timestamps. Each one a snapshot of the same exact choice being made over and over again. That was also the week I ran into Mrs. Keller from across the street. She's one of those neighbors who's always outside, tending to her flowers, knows everything that's going on without ever seeming like she's watching. She nodded toward my yard, squinting a little. He's still doing that. I let out a small breath, half a laugh. Every Friday. She shook her head slowly. That man's been cutting corners his whole life, literally and otherwise. I raised an eyebrow. So this isn't new? Oh, honey, she said, leaning a little on her rake. Before you moved in, that lot sat empty for a year. He used to drive right across it like it was his personal driveway. I guess he just never adjusted. That stuck with me more than I expected, because suddenly, this wasn't just about me, or even about the grass. It was about a habit he never had to question, a boundary that, until now, didn't exist. And now it did. Week 6, same thing. By this point, I had upgraded my documentation a bit, started including wider shots, showing the full context of the property line, the survey marker clearly visible near the edge of the ruts. I even pulled a screenshot from the county property map to include in the packet, just in case there was ever any argument about where my land ended and his began. The total was climbing now, not fast, but steadily. 48, 96, 144. Each incident adding another layer. Still no response. And I'll admit, part of me started to wonder if I was just sending letters into a void, like maybe he wasn't even opening them. Maybe they were piling up somewhere in his house. Ignored, unopened, meaningless. But then week 7 hit, and everything shifted. Friday evening, same routine, but this time, I watched the whole thing from the window, not hiding it, not stepping back. Just standing there, arms crossed, letting him see me if he chose to look. He didn't. Not once. He drove straight across the lawn, tires digging in a little deeper than usual, then swung into his driveway and shut off the engine like it was any other day. Saturday morning, I went out and took my photos, measurements, but there was something different in the air, something that felt like it was about to break. By Monday, I sent out notice number 7. That brought the total to just over $300. And then nothing. Tuesday passed. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday came again, and I almost expected him to stop this time, not because he'd suddenly become considerate, but because the pattern had gone on long enough that something had to give. But habits don't break that easily. 6:20 p.m. Engine. Crunch. Turn. Same as always. At this point, I wasn't even angry anymore, just curious. Curious how far he'd take it, how long he'd ignore something that was becoming harder and harder to dismiss. By the time I sent notice number 10, the total had crossed $400. I started printing out everything twice, one copy for him, one copy for me, organized in a binder that was slowly getting thicker with each passing week. Tabs for each incident, labeled neatly dates, amounts, evidence. It looked less like a neighbor dispute and more like a case file. And maybe that's what it was becoming. Week 11, week 12, the routine never changed. But something else did. I started noticing little things, like how his truck would pause just a fraction longer before cutting the corner, like maybe he was thinking about it for half a second, or how he'd pull into his driveway a little slower, like he was aware of something but not ready to confront it. Or maybe I was just reading into it. Either way, the numbers kept climbing. By the time I sent out notice number 14, the total sat at $620. 14 separate incidents. 14 documented entries. 14 chances for him to stop. That envelope felt different in my hand when I dropped it off. Heavier, even though it was just paper. Because at that point, this wasn't a warning anymore. It was a statement. And apparently, that was the point where it finally reached him. Sunday afternoon, I was out on the porch, laptop open, going through some of the footage, organizing clips, when I heard footsteps coming up the path. Not the usual casual pace, heavier, more deliberate. I looked up, and there he was. Travis stood at the edge of my porch, arms crossed tight against his chest, jaw set like he'd been chewing on something for a while, and finally decided to spit it out. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at me, then at the yard, then back at me again. "You serious with this?" he finally said, his voice low but tight. I closed the laptop halfway, not shutting it completely. "With what?" He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Don't play dumb, man. The letters, the bills. You really sending me invoices over tire tracks?" I leaned back slightly in my chair, keeping my tone even. "Not tire tracks. Property damage." He shook his head, stepping a little closer. "It's grass." I nodded once. "It's my grass." There was a pause there, not long, but long enough to feel the shift in the air between us. He exhaled through his nose, looking off to the side for a second before coming back to me. "You could have just said something." I tilted my head slightly. "I did. 14 times. That hit him, not hard, but enough to register." His eyes narrowed just a bit. "That's not the same thing," he said. I opened the laptop again, turned it slightly so he could see the screen. "You want to talk about what's the same?" I clicked on a folder labeled by date, then another, and another, until the screen filled with a grid of video thumbnails. 14 weekends, I said quietly. 14 times you drove over that same spot. He didn't move. I clicked the first clip. The video started playing, his truck entering frame, cutting across the lawn, clear as day. Timestamp in the corner. Then the second. Then the third. I didn't rush it, just let them play, one after another, the pattern speaking for itself. By the time I got to clip number 7, his posture had changed, arms no longer as tight, weight shifting slightly from one foot to the other. By clip 10, he wasn't looking at me anymore, just the screen. And by the time the 14th video ended, the porch had gone completely quiet. I let that silence sit for a second before speaking. You had 14 chances to just not do that. He swallowed, jaw tightening again. But this time, there was something else there too. Not quite anger. Not quite embarrassment. Something in between. This is ridiculous, he muttered. But it didn't have the same weight as before. I shrugged slightly. So is driving over someone else's yard every week. Another pause. Then he looked up at me. Eyes sharper now. What do you want? And that was the moment everything finally came to a point. For a second, I didn't answer him, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted that question to sit there between us, just long enough for it to feel real. What do you want? It sounds simple, but it carries everything underneath it. Pride, frustration, the quiet realization that something small has turned into something neither of us can ignore anymore. I leaned forward slightly, resting my forearms on my knees, keeping my voice steady. I want you to stop driving over my property, and I want you to pay for the damage you've already done. No drama, no raised voice, just that. He let out a slow breath, looking past me toward the yard again, like maybe if he stared at it long enough, it would somehow look less like a problem. $600 for grass, he said under his breath, almost like he was trying to convince himself it wasn't worth taking seriously. I nodded once. 620. That tiny correction, it landed harder than I expected. His eyes flicked back to mine, a little sharper now, like he was deciding whether to push back or just let it go. You really went through all this, he said, gesturing vaguely toward the laptop, the porch, the stack of papers beside me. I followed his gaze for a moment, the binder, the neatly labeled tabs, the printed photos, all of it sitting there like quiet proof of time passing. You really drove through it 14 times, I replied. That did it. Not in a dramatic way, no shouting, no slammed doors, just a subtle shift, like something in him finally gave up the argument. His shoulders dropped a fraction, tension bleeding out just enough to notice. We stood there in that silence again, and this time, it didn't feel like a standoff. It felt like an ending that hadn't quite been spoken yet. All right, he said finally, voice lower now. All right, yeah. He nodded once, more to himself than to me, then turned and walked back down the path without another word. No apology, no handshake, no neighborly resolution, just acceptance. I watched him go, then closed the laptop slowly, the screen going dark like a curtain dropping at the end of a scene. For a second, I just sat there, listening to the quiet. No engine, no crunch of tires, just the normal sounds of the neighborhood settling into the evening. And I remember thinking, that's probably it. But I was wrong about one thing. Because the payment didn't come right away. A couple days passed, then 3. No envelope, no message, nothing in the mailbox except the usual bills and ads. And I'll admit, a small part of me wondered if he'd changed his mind overnight. If that moment on the porch had been more about ending the conversation than actually resolving anything. But then, Friday morning, I stepped outside to grab the mail, and there it was. A plain white envelope. No stamp. No return address, just my name written across the front in thick, slightly uneven handwriting. I picked it up, turned it over once, felt the weight of it, the faint shift of something inside. And right there, standing at the edge of my driveway, I opened it. Cash. Counted. Neat. Exact. $620. No note. No explanation. No apology. Just the amount. I stood there for a second longer than I needed to, looking at it. Then back at the yard, at the stretch of grass where those ruts had been showing up week after week. They were still there, faint now, but visible if you knew where to look. And for the first time in a while, I felt something close to relief. Not satisfaction exactly. Not victory, just a quiet sense that the line had been drawn, and this time, it held. That evening, around the usual time, I found myself listening again. Not intentionally, just out of habit. Waiting for that familiar sound of the engine turning onto maple, the low rumble getting closer. It came, right on schedule. I walked over to the window, not rushing, just curious, and watched as Travis's truck approached the corner. For a split second, everything looked the same. Same speed, same angle, the setup for the same exact move I'd watched 14 times before. And then, right at the edge of my lawn, he stopped. Not completely, just enough. The truck rolled forward a few inches, paused. Then the wheel turned, sharply this time, a wider arc, forcing him to back up slightly before pulling into his driveway the proper way. It wasn't smooth. It wasn't convenient. But it stayed off my grass. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until I let it out. And that was it. No more tire tracks. No more ruts. No more Friday evening routine cutting across something that wasn't his. Weeks went by, then a month. The grass filled back in slowly, stubborn like it always was, covering the scars little by little until you couldn't really tell anything had happened there unless you'd seen it yourself. Travis and we went back to something like neutral. Not friendly, not hostile, just two people who understood exactly where the boundary was now. We'd pass each other occasionally, nod once, nothing more. And honestly, that was enough. But here's the part that stuck with me. The part one still think about sometimes when I'm out there mowing, following those same straight lines I've always tried to keep. It wasn't really about the money. $620 isn't nothing, but it's not life-changing either. And it wasn't even about the grass, not entirely. It was about what happens when someone gets used to crossing a line that no one ever made them respect, and what it takes to make that line visible. Because I could have gone over there after the first time, knocked on his door, had an awkward conversation, maybe gotten a half-hearted apology, and hoped it stopped. Maybe it would have, or maybe it wouldn't. Instead, I chose something quieter, slower, something that didn't rely on him agreeing with me in the moment. I let the pattern build, let the evidence speak, let the consequences stack up until ignoring them wasn't easier than dealing with them. And yeah, some people would say that's petty, that I dragged it out, made it bigger than it needed to be. Maybe they're right. But here's the question I keep coming back to. If someone keeps taking something small from you, over and over again, without asking, without acknowledging it, at what point does it stop being small? At what point do you stop fixing the damage and start holding them accountable for it? Because from where I'm standing now, looking at a yard that finally feels like mine again, I don't think the answer is as obvious as people like to pretend it is. So I'm curious what you think. Was I justified in the way I handled it? Or should I have just walked over there and dealt with it face-to-face from the start? Drop your take in the comments, because I've seen this kind of thing go both ways, and honestly, I don't think there's just one right answer.